Danielle Zay, which is a French specialist about inclusive education. So she works all over the world with many specialists in different researches. So this afternoon she will present you her vision of intercultural dialogue and inclusive education.
First, I will thank you because it's true that I have many publications in English. Indeed, although my English is not good, but I have learned a lot with you and from you. Thanks from your introductions about what you are living in your country. And then the PowerPoint will not be completely adapted to what I will say because I have changed my mind after listening to you. I saw that you already have dealt with some points. I thought I will speak about them and then I will not repeat them. But new questions appear for me. I didn't think of them, and so I will complete as I can, and I will leave you. I will try to be on time. It's difficult to leave you at least half an hour for questions and for a debate, and we will continue this debate with you. I know that tonight there is a feast. I will be there. I have invited a friend of mine who is at the University of Bordeaux. And I was in other conferences with her. She is in a very well-known team about violence, but she knows too inclusive education. So my lecture is entitled Intercultural Dialogue in an Inclusive Education. Below are the title and cover of my last book, in which I introduced my research results about the themes of the lecture. 2 chapters in particular deal with intercultural education and what to do with students with immigrant background. And the title of the book is Inclusive Education, an Answer to School Failure. It is in French, but I have developed several points, in particular about multiculturalism and interculturalism in articles in English that I will introduce later. I don't know if you have had the copies of the references of my lecture. You have them? I guess maybe I will quote other authors with what I will add to complete your presentations. So maybe I will use other authors more than those I quote in the references, because a discourse, a lecture is always going on, and it's never achieved. No research is achieved, and every day you learn something. I have learned a lot today, and so, of course, I will change something in my way of dealing with the questions. Initially, and still now, I hope for you, this lecture deals with one of the TTIMS projects. The TTIMS project, the teacher training in multicultural settings in which you are participating. The target I read in the project is, and in which I could bring something, to develop the understanding of the key concepts of culture, intercultural, and multicultural schools and identify the links between inclusive education, multilingualism, and interculturalism. Why the concepts first? Of course, I am a researcher. The concepts are first for me. But it's not only to me, but to the UNESCO and many other international organizations. The move towards inclusion is not simply a technical or organizational change, but also a movement with a clear philosophy. The principles of inclusion can be used and are used as a foundation for practice and for projects. To me, such targets mean something that you illustrate very well with your presentations. Thanks to school, if we apply these principles, could any student say, I am a European, born in Bordeaux, Cordoba, Oxford, or Salzburg, with parents born in Alger, Karachi, and Lagos. And I think this is a stake for Europe. I will present the stakes of such targets. What is the challenge? Then I will analyze the concept of inclusion and the origins of inclusive education and why and how an inclusive education is considered as the best policy to answer the challenge of multicultural societies in a globalized world. Then you have said something about that. I heard it in your presentations, at least in one. The European shift from multiculturalism toward interculturalism and intercultural dialogue that is recommended now by several organizations, international organizations, such as the UNESCO and the Council of Europe. I will conclude on barriers and steps toward inclusive education as a basis for intercultural dialogue. The part I will change the most is the second, about the concept of intercultural, multicultural, and you have added something. I have published a lot about that, and I have forgotten it when I prepare my lecture, is integration. But I can't leave that apart because you have said, in particular, you have quoted David Cameron, and I had prepared something about what said David Cameron, maybe not exactly like you introduced it. Him. No, it's a statement. This lecture is mainly based on my last book, of course, that introduces results of the research supported by the European Commission in 10 countries for 2 years, 2007-2009, and I was responsible for France. The title of the tender was Strategies for Supporting Schools and Teachers in order to foster social inclusion. EAC is Education and Culture, the department that was responsible for the tender. The book is in French, but the research report for the 10 countries is in English, with each national countries and 3 general syntheses about the results, the comparative results, the analysis of what we can draw as conclusions from the 10 national reports. It was released on the European Commission website, and now you can have free access on the Dutch research website because the responsible for the project was Dutch. And now the European Commission only keeps the reports 1 year. And then, but then you can have them on other websites. Other main references are my article. Tiens, ça suit pas là. Ouais, ça va. My article, Cooperative School Model to promote intercultural dialogue between citizens to be in Policy Futures Education, a review that is disseminated by Eric, the Federal US Ministry of Education, and the introduction to the issue by Tina Beasley and Michael Peters. The title of the issue of their introduction as editors was Interculturalism, Ethnocentrism and Dialogue. The book by Gary Thomas and Mark Vaughan, Inclusive Education, which is, to me, it's the best about resuming all the research and international movements about inclusive education. It was published in 2009. The Councils of Europe White Paper on Intercultural Dialogue, which is the Bible for the question. Everybody referred to it. It is free access to, and you can have free access to that. What is a white paper? You know? You know what is a white paper? Not only by the European Commission. White paper, generally speaking, well, I prefer to explain the words I used because well, we have then a common understanding of the thing. Generally speaking, white papers are policy documents containing background information and proposals for action in specific political area. The name and concept of white paper originate in parliamentary practice, particularly in England, in the first half of the 20th century, where this type of document was bound in white instead of the customary blue paper cover. The Council of Europe has published very few white papers. It is a very, when they do that, it is something for which they have the agreement of the state members, of the representatives of the 47 state members. So there are very few. There was one before this one about intercultural dialogue. It was about racism, anti-racism. What is the challenge? First question. This was an introduction from where I speak with what I speak. The challenge. First shocks. We have to choose between a society of living all together with respect and solidarity and benefiting us all. Below the poster is a photo of an event organized in the whole France by associations. I appreciated a lot what you said about associations and the project what was quoted, START. This can help. These associations show the work they do in society, including school, to contribute to better integrating every people, those who can help and those who need help. The associations in France now feel threatened because the French state reduced its financial support. Today, this morning, when I had my breakfast at the hotel, there was something on the TV, and some people, I think it was the left, very left, not the left we have now as a president. And so they said, we can't accept Hollande's, our president, policy, and the European Union, what imposes to reduce the public expenses and social welfare. And I think that if we work, you and I, to develop Europe, I think we need Europe for peace and for economy también also, even if there are many liberal lobbying, but we need it, and we have to think of such problems, to try to convince others that Europe is good for them, because one of the main reproaches that are made to the EU is to incite state members to cut social expenses to keep a balanced budget. And many people think that it is better to have better social life and less balanced budget. For me, I am an economist from my first training, and in that time we learned Keynes. And for Keynes, the state doesn't have to have a balanced budget if there is a crisis, and we are doing exactly the contrary. I remain for Keynes. So, but I would like to keep Europe with Keynes, not with what we have now. Well, this was only a little personal comment. So I go back to my lecture, and the second choice. Will we choose, and can we choose, and how? This is the question. A society of living all together with respect and solidarity and with all our difference, or the war of everyone against everyone, making everyone's life a misery. This is a liberal credo, the best will win. But we may think that it is better if everybody wins and if there are no losers. The white paper on intercultural dialogue was launched by the Council of Europe Ministers of Foreign Affairs at their 118th ministerial session in Strasbourg in 2008, and the challenge the 47 state members had to face was defined by the following statement: managing Europe's increasing cultural diversity rooted in the history of our continent and enhanced by globalization in a democratic manner has become a priority in recent years. In our research report, we have developed the statement by the Council of Europe. And in particular, in our analysis in the French report for the international project, Strategies for Supporting School and Teachers in order to foster social inclusion. Our research have led to the conclusion that the goal of all education for democracy encompasses developing the social links that make all citizens, whatever their origin of birth, members of the same state, setting out their rights and duties with respect to the observation of the same laws, respecting individual differences, whatever their origin and whether biological or socio-culturally constructed, and ensuring that everyone has access to the means to optimum personal development, taking into account what he or she is by nature and not by socially generated discrimination, whatever the social group, family or other. Maintaining and developing the university and diversity of European societies is the introduction to a recent Council of Europe report on a survey on initial teacher education with respect to social diversity. The leader of the project was Arneson. In other words, an inclusive education prepares for an inclusive society. This was a challenge to us all in our project with 10 countries. All European education systems aim to be inclusive, to offer children and young people the opportunity to benefit from school education and to prepare them for life after schools. So, which choice will we do, and the state members? I come back to what said the white paper and the ministerial session. There was 2 publications. A society of segregated communities marked at best by the coexistence of majorities and minorities with differentiated rights and responsibilities, loosely bound together by mutual ignorance and stereotypes, or is it a vibrant and open society without discrimination, benefiting us all, marked by the inclusion of all residents in full respect of their human rights? To build an inclusive school and society school team, and each teacher have to make school team and each teacher have to make possible a social life for all students in their school, a society that reflects diversity outside but organized for a participation of all, with freedom to have specific groups but not segregated communities. I will come back to this point later about pedagogy. In my last article on European multiculturalism and secularism, I analyze how Muslim young people are incited to revolt because they only want to be considered as citizens like all of us and not to be identified only by their religion and because of their immigrant backgrounds. You don't have to say, he's a Catholic in France. Majority is Catholic. Why? To define somebody by he's a Muslim. So all they claim is the same, to be the same as other citizens, and not differentiated because of their immigrant backgrounds. So we have to change our mind. Behavior and practice is to be learned. By which education? To respond to the challenge, it should be an education preparing citizens to live all together with respect and solidarity, whatever be the differences between them. Inclusion's origins are in special education. The issue raised was, isn't it unfair in a democratic society to label deprived children as mentally retarded and segregated them from others in special schools? In his article, Special Education is Much of It Justifiable, done in 1968, preceded changes that were subsequently talked by international organizations such as the UNESCO, when fostering IFE, education for all, and defining the equal status of these pupils who come from poverty or low status ethnic groups and all misfits transferred out of the regular grades. Thus, inclusion represents the confluence of several streams of thoughts claiming for greater social justice, calls for civil rights, and against discrimination and segregated schools. John Rawls' theory of justice or Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream exemplify a long march of change from a discourse of authority to one of greater democracy, fraternity, and equity, and expressions of injustice about race or disabled persons. They call for justice rather than charity. In education, the fundamental argument is that the policies and practices of an education system should be based not on needs, special needs as it is defined, but on rights. So inclusive education comes from an international shift with two cornerstones. 1989, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Child. If you remember the rights of man, it was in 1789. 2 centuries were needed to recognize that child also has rights. And in its very title, the notion of right takes the place of need. Everyone has the right to education, Article 26. Second very important step, the UNESCO Salamanca Statement on Special Needs Education and its accompanying framework for action were agreed by representatives of 92 governments and 25 international organizations. All children and young people of the world, with their individual strengths and weaknesses, with their hopes and expectations, have the right to education. It is not our education system that have a right to certain types of children. Therefore, it is the school system of a country that must be adjusted to meet the needs of all children. All children have the right to receive the kind of education that does not discriminate on any grounds, such as caste, ethnicity, religion, economic status, refugee. Inclusion is seen as a process. It's important to see that it is a process. That is to say something that is never achieved. What you have always to be cautious, to continue, because it can always be rigid and then it cannot go on. So it's a process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning cultures and communities and reducing exclusion within and from education. Inclusion involves a particular emphasis of those groups of learners who may be at risk of marginalization, exclusion, or underachievement. It goes further than IFE, education for all, because it is about access to education and to regular education. All the grades, the regular schools and classroom, in a manner that there is no discrimination or exclusion for any individual or group within or outside school systems. It is why this is important relatively to IFE, for instance, inclusive education is linked with inclusive society and civic integration. I will come back about that. It is why inclusive education is the best framework for an intercultural education that addresses not only minorities to include, but all, accepting inclusion of all. In my last article, as in my book and others, I think that intercultural education is more important for the majority and for the native students than for those who are coming in. Because those who are arriving, they want to be integrated, and they are prevented from doing it. We will go back with that. It could seem provocating, but more I go on my research, and more I think that the problem is the education of majority and of native populations. So we will come back with about that. So it's what I say about, for instance, well, I have worked about Muslim students with a friend, and she's a very good researcher. She is at the Institute about Muslim populations, Françoise Lorcerie. To me, she's one of the best in France, much better than me about this question. And I follow her point of view about that. We will never have an intercultural education that can solve the problems if it does not address the native students. And this is, to me, it's the main point. But we will come back with that. I have a lot of examples, but I don't think I will have time to describe them. But you have them too in your presentations. I saw the same point of view than me, but we are now, it's difficult because of the regular school system. It's difficult because the school system is long to adapt, and it's true that the context is not good now. And the white paper about anti-racism maybe could be nowadays still more important than it was, because I don't think we are in progress now. Well, we will see that after. The poster. Well, if I put a poster, it is because I think it's important to have this poster. And it is with one of your presentations about associations. In this poster, it is... bon, j'ai plus là. Ah, voilà, c'est celui-là. In English, I am not good. In French, I can speak without my notes, but in English, as I am not sure of my English, well, it's an euphemism to say that I am not sure. I prefer to read my paper, to read not too badly. This poster is from a summer university, which were organized by two associations, my main associations, PRISM, promotion of social initiatives in educational middles, and another association, FGPEP, which works with children out of school for leisures, for holidays, and also for disabled children. And this theme of a university, I think, is important for us to overcome, sortir de l'indifférence aux différences, éducation inclusive pour tous, inclusive education for all, to overcome our indifference about differences. And maybe we don't overcome them now. It's difficult to do it. Inclusion is not a marginal issue on how some learners can be integrated in mainstream education, but it looks into how to transform education systems and other learning environments in order to respond to the diversity of learners. It aims toward enabling teachers and learners both to feel comfortable with diversity and to see it as a challenge and enrichment of the learning environment rather than a problem. It is a holistic approach, including not only educational systems, but living in society. It is why the work made by the associations is so important, because they create links between school life and life outside. And this is a main point for students. When I say students, it's pupils. It's from the young age to the secondary or more. So this approach raises the question how to live all together with our differences, how to be both different and equals. Because to be a citizen, to have citizenships, is to be equal to other citizens, whatever be the place where they were born. Here, what is inclusive education? I choose this poster to illustrate my definition in this part. And this poster below, it responds the question about what is inclusive education. It is from Intercultural, the Intercultural and Anti-Racism Week in Dublin, Ireland, in 2008. The sentence is well chosen to illustrate a main characteristic of inclusive education. It's amazing what we can learn from each other. Inclusive education is an answer to the challenge of inequality and diversity in multicultural societies and schools and in a globalized world. It raises the question, what are cultures, interculturalism and multiculturalism? Now we will analyze what the concepts of cultures, interculturalism and multiculturalism mean nowadays. I will add integration, because what you said about integration, awake many things for me. So now we will see in this part what is occurring now is inside the European shift from multiculturalism toward interculturalism and intercultural dialogue. Both concepts of interculturalism and multiculturalism have been opposed for a long time. European perspectives on interculturalism date from French and Dutch responses to multiculturalism in the 80s and 90s. But interculturalism was also the Quebecer alternative to English-Canadian multiculturalism. And I am going to Canada and Quebec several times, because I am in several funds and I am an outside expert. And I see that in Quebec they have problems very similar as those we have in France, with a very similar policy, which is very different from the English-speaking Canadian. But what is new now? This opposition has existed for a lot of years. But what is new now is that those who adopted multiculturalism deny it now. English ahead. I have just been publishing a paper in Policy Futures in Education. The issue was released last month in March, and it was entitled Islam and the End of European Multiculturalism. To Peters and Bisley, the editors of the issue, multiculturalism has been the dominant paradigm for the West since the 60s. But since September 11 and terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, Madrid, and London, Europe has officially turned away from the state multiculturalism. The Prime Minister in the UK, you have quoted him too, David Cameron, echoed the criticism of state multiculturalism of three other European prime ministers. In Germany, France, Germany first, Angela Merkel always is first, France and Spain, the others follow. She's the only woman, but she always is first. I don't know why, I think it is not because she's a woman. We don't have to make discrimination. And he says, the Prime Minister of the UK, he said, we have encouraged different cultures to live separate lives and failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. We have even tolerated these segregated communities behaving in ways that run counter to our values. All move toward what the Australian Prime Minister called a civic integration, to prevent us from the consequences of a multicultural policy. I will quote some researchers are going in the same way, and they have a good basis with an investigation led by the Pew Research Center. It is one of the most famous US investigation center about 4 European countries. There were Germany, the UK, France, and Spain, about what the Muslim populations thought about some questions as identity and religion. Is their identity more defined by religion or by nationality? I will deal with this point later, because I will finish by integration after multiculturalism and interculturalism. But I will quote, I have to quote a famous American researcher, Jobk, and other, because the researchers too have analyzed the question and these statements by the Prime Minister. Jobk said, and my colleague was very, I think you think that it was really provoking what he said. So we will debate about that after. The fact that Britain is now routinely forced to deal with rather extremist claims at considerable public expense suggests that this cannot be the best of all religious governance worlds. Moreover, British Muslims, though pampered by a unique accommodating government, rank among the most dissatisfied and alienated Muslim minorities of Europe, which cast a long shadow over Britain's liberal multiculturalism. By contrast, I don't say that, but Job said it. I will make a criticism of French integration. But Job said, by contrast, France has nothing of this. This is despite the fact that this country is usually attacked for its heavy line on the headscarf, deemed only to alienate France's Muslims and to fuel further Islamic extremism. In reality, France is the only country in Europe to confront its Muslim minority with an attitude, and one that has paid off. This is because it has not been an attitude of exclusion or racism, as some have argued, but of setting clear and equal terms of integration. Muslims have understood and accepted these terms. Analyzing the findings of the same survey about European Muslims and some of their interviews, Allen raises the question in a subtitle of her article, "Is France doing a better job of integration than its critic?" She draws the same conclusions as Job. We will go back to integration and to such statements. And maybe I was very, it was an interrogation for me, the survey you quote about the UK, with what they think of their identity. But I think that if it is in 2007, it is contradictory with the Pew Research Center. But if it is some years later, it could be most understandable because there is always an evolution. And now there is an evolution, a clear evolution about all these questions. We are in a context, a very tough context now about national identity in all the European countries and others, with closing the frontiers, the borders, and with a rejection of what is outsiders, every outsider. So it's why inclusion also is always a process, because there are evolutions and we have always to work, and maybe more sometimes than in other times. But, well, with this criticism of multiculturalism, the way was open to coming back to interculturalism and concepts as intercultural dialogue and intercultural education. How are they defined? To the Council of Europe, there are an answer to respect and promote cultural diversity on the basis of the values on which the organization is built and essential conditions for the development of societies based on solidarity. To Peters and Beasley, in their previous issue of Policy Futures in Education, about the white paper on intercultural dialogue, the Council of Europe argues that our common future depends on our ability to safeguard and develop human rights as enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law, and to promote mutual understanding. If there is a European identity to be realized, it will be based on shared fundamental values, respect for common heritage and cultural diversity, as well as respect for the equal dignity of every individual. to prevent from the consequences of a multicultural policy. Intercultural dialogue is a concept and discourse that has emerged as a distinct form of communication practice. Since the 80s, it has been adopted as the basis for interreligious and interfaith initiatives and has become increasingly associated with a liberal theory of modernity and internationalism based on freedom, democracy, human rights, and tolerance. The concept has been adopted by many of the world's major policy organizations, such as the United Nations and the UNESCO, besides the Council of Europe, and viewed as the dominant thread and paradigm for cultural policy and the educational basis for the development of intercultural understanding. In one influential formulation, intercultural education is viewed as the global forum for the analysis of issues dealing with education in plural societies, focusing on the management of cultural diversity and including, the list of questions is huge, multiculturalism, multilingualism, intercultural communication, the maintenance and fostering of human rights, anti-racist education, pluralism within democracies and in post-communist and post-colonial countries, conflict resolution and avoidance, international mediation, migration and problems of migrant labor, indigenous, cultural and minority rights, refugee education, language policy, and perhaps above all, the question of cultural identity and emerging global forms of identity, especially with youth cultures. Yet, the prevalent formulation of interculturalism, while taking a position of openness to the other and looking for commonalities, ignores a whole range of cultures, such as youth cultures, urban cultures, rural cultures, gay cultures, etc., in favor of ethnic-based cultures. The expectation is that an attitude of openness to people of other cultures will lead to dialogue, comparisons, and understanding and acceptance between cultural groups, not based simply on awareness of differences, but in finding commonalities. Yet, interculturalism cannot be considered separate from associated discourses of ethnocentrism, which is tangled in a web of meanings of other concepts, including cultural relativism and universalism. Strategically, ethically, and practically, ethnocentrism and associated racism is the major presumption and problematic of interculturalism and intercultural education. It is not by chance that Besley and Peter's introduction to the Policy Futures education issue of 2011 that I am following in this lecture is entitled Interculturalism, Ethnocentrism, and Dialogue. Besley and Peters quote Sumner. In 1907, Sumner was first to define what is ethnocentrism. To say that interculturalism cannot be considered as separate from associated discourse of ethnocentrism, that means a view in which one's own group is the center of everything and all others are scaled and rated with reference to it. This hierarchical thinking applies to cultures and nations. Sumner argues that ethnocentric people would judge other groups in relation to their own particular ethnic group or culture, and they would have a feeling of superiority against others. Sumner claims that throughout history, almost all cultures have located themselves at the center of the world and civilization. I quote Sumner. In Folkways, a study of the sociological importance of usages, manners, customs, mores, and morals. He wrote in 2007, the Jews divided all mankind into themselves and Gentiles. They were the chosen people. The Greeks and Romans called all outsiders barbarians. The Arabs regarded themselves as the noblest nation and all others as more or less barbarous. In 1896, the Chinese Minister of Education and his counselors edited a manual in which this statement occurs. How grand and glorious is the Empire of China, the Middle Kingdom, center of the earth. She is the largest and richest in the world. The grandest men in the world have all come from the Middle Empire. In Russian books and newspapers, the civilizing mission of Russia is talked about just as in the books and journals of France, Germany, and the United States. The civilizing mission of those countries is assumed and referred to as well understood. Each state now regards itself as the leader of civilization, the best, the freest, and the wisest, and all others as inferiors. Maybe we can think this statement could be true still, yet nowadays. So, are we going to now? We see that interculturalism and multiculturalism don't solve anything. And integration. Now we are going to a civic integration. And we have a wonderful model of civic integration, the French model. So the French TTIMS, now I will criticize it the same, of course. We will see it is not to say that everything is bad, but that we have to be cautious with any model, concept, and principle. Because there is no good model, there is no good concept, there is only good thing when we know what we want to do and we know how we will do it to respect others and to be equals with others. So now, I would like to have a debate, and I think you would like to have it. I have 20 minutes left, I think. Yes, I thought I would be too long. I was sure that I have shortened and shortened, but now I have new ideas with what you have seen. And so, not only I don't short, I am developing much more than I thought. But it doesn't, the last part we will do it together. It doesn't matter. So, speaking about the French model, you have given, thank you, I don't have to give it now, all the laws and the history since the Enlightenment. Now, why? What are the, I have to say, why Jock and others says that it is a good model, this integration. So I will quote before the criticisms, I will quote the results, I will synthesize the results of this famous Pew Research Center investigation about the Muslim populations in 4 European countries. So I will quote a synthesis of the results. The European Muslims' answers to the questions show that economic worries and unemployment within their community are top concerns for them. 83% in France, 78% in the UK, more than religious issue. They are worried about Islamic extremism too. In terms of integration, however, the French differ. That is a fact. While half of British Muslims consider there is a natural conflict between practicing Islam and living in modern society, 72% of French Muslims see none, a proportion identical to that recorded for French society overall. French Muslims are also, like the Spanish, the ones who feel the least hostility to practicing Muslims, and 39% believe that most Europeans are hostile to Muslims, against 52% in Germany. Asked what defines them the most, their nationality or their religion. Comment on dit religion, là, que je le dis toujours mal? Religion. Oh, bon, je le dis bien. Oh, well, I see my weaknesses too much. And so, well, religion. What defines them the most? Their nationality or their religion. 81% of British Muslims opt for the latter, while only 46% of French Muslims said religion, against an almost equal proportion, 42% for nationality. These results are very different to those of the French population as a whole, in which 83% identify first of all with their nationality. But the figures are close to those found in the USA, where 48% of the population define themselves firstly as Americans and 42% as Christians. Finally, the perspective of French Muslims on other religions is much more positive. 91% of French Muslims have a favorable opinion of Christians, and 71% have a good opinion of Jews, which make them an exception. Only 32% of British Muslims and 38% of German Muslims have a good opinion of Jews. So, when we read these results, we can think that the French secular education based on integration more than on respecting the diversity of birth in a community could be better. But we have to analyze what you say about the French evolution to understand the weaknesses. The weaknesses maybe is not in this the religion. I think it's not the point, the religion, secular or other, but the policy about religion. But we have to remind that the demand by minorities or specific social bodies for the right to different treatment compared to other citizens has been a bone of contention in France ever since the French Revolution in 1789 and the Universal Declarations of the Rights of Man. As all people by their very nature are free and equal humans, the new political representatives of France, in the name of this value of universalism, recognized the same rights for all individuals, independent of their community of birth and their social, ethnic, or religious background. And at the same time, abolished anything that might link these same individuals to a specific social identity. On the one hand, the same citizenship rights were recognized for members of the Third Estate as opposed to the noblesse and the clergy, the Catholic Church, Jews and black slaves. All were recognized as equal citizens. On the other hand, the corporations that governed professions under the Ancien Regime, the former monarchical systems, were abolished, and priests who refused to take an oath to allegiance to the Republic and remained under the foreign papal authority of Rome were banned from continuing to preach to their flocks. This historical background inspired the compulsory secular and free republican school model, which was permanently institutionalized by the 1882 Ferry Law and has been regarded as sacred ever since. Even today, it is considered a golden age. During the Third Republic, claims by regional minorities were bitterly fought, embodying resistance to a republican citizenship which was developed as a value of universality assimilated with an uniformity. In order to be a good French citizen, you had to speak French. Young school children who spoke in their regional dialect, pejoratively termed patois, were corrected by a whack on their fingers with a rule. So we can see that integration, the French conception of integration, maybe realize a good citizenship, but it has weaknesses. And if I resume critiques about the French policy based on integration and including intercultural education, I could say that the main problem of French school, and it is an historical problem, is to take insufficient account of all the many differences with respect to knowledge, whatever be their socio-cultural, psychological, or physical origin. And so, intercultural education, for instance, was very slow to be accepted in France, very slow. And multicultural, of course, no. But finally, the issue is not choosing or less choosing between multiculturalism and interculturalism. Both aim to support a democratic society in a globalized world. It is to draw lessons from a multicultural policy that has failed to make a democratic society and its value exist and develop. Multiculturalism and interculturalism complement one another. The prefix multi gives greater weight to the first goal, acknowledging diversity, while inter invokes more the facet of integration, but an integration that is conceived not on homogeneity and assimilation, but of recognizing the difference. So we have strengths and weaknesses in every model, and the importance is that no culture is static, and all cultures change to varying degrees in response to contact with other cultures, especially in the contemporary world with increased mobility, migration, and globalization. The most that every people live is going out of his or her own waters to mix with others. The issue is how to make all people living in the same territory, making society all together with the same rights, whatever be their differences, young and old, men and women, from the suburbs and from the inner city, from the same land and from others, with the same language or not, etc. Such a target needs principle, funding and education, and all pedagogical settings that can be used, intercultural and others. This is the issue addressed by inclusive education, but it is a long way to go and change systems and mind. I can say some words about barriers and steps. I would say a little more, 10 minutes more. It's okay?
Yes. We need to have time to...
Because we have to take time to debate too, to have time to debate too. So maybe I will finish with a little drawing made by my granddaughter. I didn't find a photo to illustrate what I would say, and she drew it for me, so I will show it to you. And so he's not unable to enter. The door is too narrow. The classroom has to be adapted to the needs of every student. I will conclude with that. And I would have a lot of things to say, but I can't say that during 3 or 4 hours, so it will be very much. And Thank you.